This podcast is powered by Pelotonia. To learn more about our goaltend cancer, visit pelotonia.org or see the link in the show notes.
The reason I ride Pelotonia is because they gave me my dad 4 years with stage 4 colon cancer, which is unheard of.
I still question the reason, why me? But then later on, I found out why.
Welcome to One Goal, a podcast from Pelotonia. We're a community dedicated to funding innovative cancer research through a 3-day experience of cycling and volunteering. I'm your host and Chief Operating Officer of Pelotonia, Joe Apgar. Your journey with us to the finish line begins now. Pelotonia is powered by an amazing community, and it's through research that we will see an end to cancer. We want to thank our major funding partners: the American Electric Power Foundation, Huntington, the L Brands Foundation, and Peggy and Richard Santulli. Whether it's a cancer diagnosis or something else, during any challenging situation, you're bound to ask yourself the question, why? Why something happened to you or a loved one? In many cases, as frustrating as it can be, it may take time to receive clarity or closure. In this story you're about to hear, 2 women found themselves in the midst of their own challenging journeys. But through Pelotonia, they found support within each other and our community. They would also soon be able to, at least in part, answer that question, why? We'll begin with Selena Browning, who started her own journey when someone close to her received that diagnosis no one wants to hear. This episode has been titled, Finding Their Why.
In 2015, in the spring, my dad went to an appointment because he thought he was having a gallbladder attack. And when they got in there, they realized that he had stage 4 colon cancer. He was definitely there was no quit in him, and there was no question we were going to throw all the things against the wall and fight. So he went through a standard chemo, and we went back in April of 2016. And he had seen his primary care oncologist in Dayton, and she had explained to him like his test results and the CAT scan, or not the CAT scan, but the PET scan. And I said, okay, well, let's talk to the doctor at the James to see next steps. And we saw the doctor, and I think the doctor said the same thing at the James that the doctor in Dayton said, but he said it in a way that we understood that my dad was in remission. So I started thinking about I'm big on owing the universe. And so I felt like the universe had given us this gift that, he was in remission, and that it was time for me to pay it forward. And so I was off to the races on my bike, and I trained my first year on a really super duper heavy cruiser, and I rode my first Pelotonia on a beach cruiser. And honestly, it transformed me physically. I lost a lot of weight, 140 pounds in my first year and a half of training with Pelotonia.
You lost 140 pounds?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But in my first year, Team Buckeye approached me with this I Ride For You program, which would pair you with a survivor. And lucky for me, my survivor was Betty.
My name is Betty Scipio. I'm originally from Jamaica. I'm an island girl. This all started when my primary care doctor, found a lump in my throat and advised me to go seek treatment for it and find out what's going on. I had a biopsy done in 2010 and it came back negative, so I was fine. I went in 2014. I wasn't feeling well. My throat has felt different, sore. I went in for my follow-up, and I was asked to do a blood work. Found out there was a cyst that burst in my throat. 2 weeks later, I went back in, had a biopsy done. On December 18, I got a call from my endocrinologist with the result of my biopsy, and she told me, you have papillary carcinoma. I break down. She sat on the phone with me for about an hour. She told me what I need to do. That Friday, I went in to see her, and she told me, don't worry about it. It's going to be taken care of. All you need to do is follow all the steps. And so they went in. I did a total thyroidectomy where they removed all my thyroid. 2 weeks later, I was told that you're going to be scheduled for radiation. Went and did radiation, my first testing of radiation, March 3rd. And then on March 6th, I went in for my dose of radiation. Fortunately, I didn't have to take a lot. And then in November of 2015, I was told that they have no trace of cancer in my system. And so I was cancer-free.
So that was like a year almost of from the day you got diagnosed, December 18th, all the way to November, when you were declared cancer-free. You mentioned, when you got the call that it was cancer, you sort of broke down and lost it. What hit you in that moment? Was it the fact that, you had been told that it's a really low chance, I think you said 5% chance, the 1 in 20 chance you hit? And is that what, struck the chord for you? Or
So it was that 5% chance. And growing up in a religious home, I keep asking, God, like, why? Why me? It's just 5% chance. Why did I have to fall in that 5% chance of having it? I still question the reason, why? Why me? But then later on, I found out why.
Betty, like, what was your, you got to opt into this program, the Ride For You program. Like, what did you want to get out of it? Like, what was your initial thought?
At first, I love Google. And what I did was I Googled Selena. Sorry.
This is the first time hearing this.
Yes.
So good. I always do research on people too with Google.
Yes.
So.
I Googled Selena. And so I was like, okay, because I love to put a face to a name. And I was like, okay. So when she told me, let's meet at the opening ceremony, I was like, okay, fine. I know who I'm looking for. And that was the reason why it was good when I met her. And I was like, oh, she's just all over the place. But love her to pieces.
This is true.
She consoled me because that was my first opening ceremony, and it hit home for me.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of cancer survivors there, their caretakers, supporters, and when they spoke about the cancer survivor community and what Pelotonia do for the community, I broke down. And who was there but the great Selena? I looked at it as, this is the reason why God put me in that 5% chance of having papillary carcinoma. Because I've met some wonderful people, and I've met Selena, so we were a perfect match. And, like my uncle said, she's my sister that my dad never told anyone about.
So that it makes sense now, because I was like, how did she know it was me? And then I kind of forgot about it 5 years later. But now I'm learning all these deep, dark secrets about Betty and on this podcast. But Betty is selling herself very short in this conversation, because although Betty cannot ride, she volunteers every year. She's somehow at every one of my finish lines, whether I'm at 25 or 55 or 45 or whatever. She's somehow volunteering in one city and also at my finish line in another city. I don't know how she does it. She is, a virtual rider. She is never hesitated to fundraise for the cause and reach out on my behalf, or like I said, obviously she's attended all my things, but she really is a key, volunteers are everything to Pelotonia, and she is a key one of those as well.
Speaking of the finish lines, because as I was a rider long before I joined the team at Pelotonia, and the finish line's emotional. When you cross the finish line, you're tired and you're exhausted, but it's also really emotional for the people waiting at the finish line too. And so, describe that first, the 2017 finish line, Betty, where you got to cheer on Selena, and at some point after she finished, meet up and give her a hug, and what was that like?
What was it like 2017?
Hot.
It's usually pretty hot.
I've never been, it was in, where was it? Beaverheimer, something up there back in the woods.
Bevelheimer Park.
Yes. And I went with my friend's mom. We tried to find somewhere to sit in the shade, but evidently there's no shade up in that place. So we went closer to the finish line, closer. And she was sending messages like how far she was and, all that. And then her brother came along. And so all of us stand in one place, and seeing her crossing that finish line was like going to like a rave party, I would say, because everybody was like screaming and taking pictures and hands in the air and everything. It was emotional. I started crying to see her cross that finish line in my honor, along with her dad's honor and everyone else.
The first year I rode for Betty was my second year. So it was, going from 25, that's like 2.5 hours of riding, once you stop and everything. And 45, 50, that's like next level.
It's double. Yeah.
And, I was so relieved. And so, it is so emotional and overwhelming to see like all those people you care about be there to support you, and just be so happy for you. But to be honest with you, that finish line was easy compared to the next year. The next year was a really, really hard finish for me because the next year was when it was so hot, and everybody died in 2018 and there were SAG vehicles running crazily, and I had terrible cramping, and I worked through all that. Thank God for some pickle juice. But
pickle juice is a savior.
It is. And but a mile away from the finish line, my bike just started to fall apart. And they came to me like 3 and 4 times to like fix it. And finally they were like, maybe time to call it quits. And they, and obviously their first concern is my safety. And I'm like, I'll just walk. And they're like, no, that's no. And so they did try to support me as much as they can. But in the end, I ended up coming in through a SAG vehicle because my bike, legitimately, things just started falling off. And so I was devastated. I was so heartbroken. It was the 10-year anniversary for Pelotonia, and I was a disaster. And nobody let me be a disaster for like more than 45 seconds. I got there and they're like, what's this? Like, you just rode 44 miles. I was like, but not 45. And so, to be honest with you, that was a much harder finish line because I didn't really actually get to finish. And so having somebody like Betty there and my family there to be like, that's like not a thing. And, Pelotonia is great about this isn't a race to ride. We don't care how far you go. It's a ride. Yeah. Right. And that's how I recruit everybody. But they had to like remind me of my own words and use them against me because, you work really hard, especially when you work through all the physical aspects of it. I was like, nope, I worked through all the cramping. I'm golden. And then for my bike to fall apart at the 11th hour, the 44th mile, I was like so sad. But by that afternoon, like I always throw a post Pelotonia I survived party at my good friends' bars. And so by that afternoon, I had already forgotten about it.
Selena, you participated in Pelotonia for a number of years prior to your father's passing, and I'm curious if there's a favorite memory that sticks out to you that he was involved in.
My dad never missed a finish line. This last year in 2019, he was really having a lot of pain for the first time. Like, I think we all expected when the cancer came back for it to be like it was the first time, which was really pretty minimal in pain and like I said, side effects earlier. But definitely when it came back the last time, he had a hard time standing for a long time and walking. So the fact that he was standing at my finish line and there's a picture of me crossing and it's a picture of his back is to me, or back is to the camera, and he's waving to me across the finish line, and knowing how hard that was for him during that time, and being there and making sure that, there was never a finish line that he wasn't at. So that was honestly one of my biggest fears this year, was crossing that finish line without him. So I just, he was the strongest person that I knew. It was just very telling that like he pushed through all that pain to make sure that I knew that he was there, because there was a lot of discussion leading up to it. I didn't want him to feel obligated, and I knew he supported me, but that was not a question for him. He was going to be there if it meant he had to crawl over broken glass to get there. So that's really indicative of who my father was. And also he instilled that in me. There's nothing that once I decide that I'm going to do something, that I do it. And I get that grit from him for sure.
How did cancer in Betty, obviously you had cancer, you were a cancer patient at one point. How did that shift your perspective on life?
So that's just my perspective on life, to live every day like it's my last. I do stuff that I would not normally do because I think that in the back of my mind, I keep living with what if. That what if is if it came back. If the cancer came back, I won't be able to do all these things. So in 2018, I booked me and my uncle a ticket and we took off to Italy. Now I was planning on going somewhere else this year, but COVID just steps right in and says, slow down. You're moving
no plans for anyone during COVID.
I know. And so I get up every day and I just do something totally different. If it wasn't for COVID, I'd probably be speaking to you from somewhere else in the world. Because I keep that what if is still in the back of my mind, even though I'm cleared every year. But I just think that I was just being relaxed, and there I go. I got hit with cancer. So I just live every day like it's my last.
Wise words. And Selena, you're curious to hear your perspective. You watch someone really close to you battle this disease, and what has that experience as being a caregiver, a loved one, how has that changed your perspective on your life?
My career was made on controlling situations. As an event planner, it's your job to step into chaos and assess the situation and put out all the fires. And dealing with the roller coaster that was my dad's cancer journey, it quickly made me realize that we don't really have control of anything. None of us do. And I feel like ultimately the reason I ride Pelotonia is because they gave me, my dad, 4 years with stage 4 colon cancer, which is unheard of. And so like, I don't regret any of that. And I took advantage and made sure that, you know, we celebrated every moment that we could together. So I just think it's an attitude of gratitude and really having the ability to keep perspective. If you would have told me that I'd be divorced and I'd be working in my dream career at Ohio State, and I'd be best of friends with Betty and so passionate about something like Pelotonia, I wouldn't have known what any of those words meant. So like, I think for me, the message is let go of the perfection and what you think your life is supposed to be, and let the universe surprise you.
What did each of your Pelotonias look like this year? Obviously, with the pandemic, we had to make a lot of changes, to what Pelotonia looked like. But I'm really proud of how our organization pivoted and shifted. And we really, we wanted to put Pelotonia in everybody's hands and let people define their own. So really curious what the both of you ended up doing for your Pelotonias.
So one of my goals was to walk 200 miles. I did from June until Pelotonia weekend. I did 300 plus miles walking.
Wow.
My other goal is to raise $500. And so I think I'm at 350 right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to I want to go above 500, but
I love it. 300 miles of walking is a lot of miles.
Yeah. And at the same time, I was doing summer steps for my job and during that time. So, yeah.
My goals this year were hard for me to come up with, just because they felt very personal. And this year, Pelotonia was already very personal to me. And so I just struggled with, how could I ever honor my dad, like in a way that was enough. And so this year, my Pelotonia really came down to 5 things. And the first one is my Pelotonia goal is to ride my bike to vote. My dad was a community organizer.
That's amazing.
And he was passionate about my generation and younger generations getting out and really exercising their vote. And so I thought, what better way to honor him than to ride my bike to do that. My second goal was to volunteer 71 hours. That is representative of the age that my dad was when he passed away, which, if you ask me, is far, far too young. And my next goal was to do 48 random acts of kindness. My dad really believed in giving back, and he was born in 1948, so that tied to that. And then I had a goal of monthly riding 112.4 miles, which was representative of the round trip miles that it was for me to visit him every Sunday in Dayton. So I did that every month. And then my last goal was to raise more money than I've ever raised, and that is $10,000. And I'm happy to say that I'm closing in on that miraculously.
It's big.
Yeah,
big.
It is big. I always bite off probably more than I can chew, but because I have this incredible community of support, somehow they make sure I always get there.
It's fascinating to see how 2 completely independent situations can lead a couple of strangers into a close friendship. That's the answer to their why. Now, Selena and Betty know who will be there when the next challenge arises. We're thankful for their willingness to share their story for this podcast and for the support of our major funding partners who make all of this possible: the American Electric Power Foundation, Huntington, the L Brands Foundation, and Peggy and Richard Santulli. This is what's next on One Goal.
There's no greater feeling professionally for an oncologist than to walk into a patient's room who's got what otherwise is known as a fatal diagnosis. And you walk in the room and you say, I've got some really good news.
Every year, I just stop and take a deep breath, because it's just, there are no words to describe the emotion.
And I think the emotions do come around. How lasting Pelotonia has been since those early days.
You've been listening to One Goal, a podcast from Pelotonia. Season 2 will be hosted by me, cancer survivor and chief operating officer of Pelotonia, Joe Apgar, with interview and production scheduling by our marketing and communications team duo, Emily Smith and Gabby Blauer. Produced, mixed, and sound designed at the studios of Wessler Media by Vince Tornero. Additional mastering by Joey Gerwin at Orange Judio. Special thank you to all of our guests for being so open and willing to share their stories. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as that will help others hear these empowering journeys. If you're curious about joining the Pelotonia community and making an impact on cancer research, please see the link in the episode notes or visit pelotonia.org. That's pelotonia.org.